I first wrote about this some 7 or 8 years ago for the magazine Philosophy Now, after an American couple intended to select an egg donor who was genetically deaf, with a view to maximise their chances of having a deaf child themselves. 2 years ago, the issue came to light again in the UK, where a deaf couple undergoing IVF treatment sought the right to select screened embryos for genetic deafness, so as to ensure that they had a deaf child. This coincided with the Human and Embryology Bill being debated in Parliament, resulting in a change in the law that prohibited such actions, albeit with some ambiguity. At the time, I recall that the media, with a couple of exceptions, treated the matter with its customary hysteria. However, we should dare to ask if the moral anger expressed was really justified, and if the new law is really just with regards to them. If this debate is new to you, then your first question is probably, why would they want to do this? In an interview with John Humphreys on Radio 4's Today programme, the husband of this couple explained that there is a division between the deaf community and the hearing community, which live largely separate lives, a separation that largely owes to the hearing community's lack of effort to meet the deaf halfway. The experience of deaf parents whose children are hearing is that those children gradually grow away from the deaf community and from their parents. He also said something very telling that may help to understand the extent of this impact, and which tells us more besides. He refused to accept that deafness was a disability, describing it as a different lifestyle, or, more significantly, culture. Of course, we can easily repeat John Humphrey's mistake and lose ourselves in the semantics. We can agree that deafness is a disability, but by focusing on this, we risk missing the important lesson. How it is that people in the deaf community experience their deafness. It informs us both of the extent of the separation between parent and child, each belonging to a different culture, and it informs us that many, at the very least, do not experience their deafness as suffering. Most parents experience a growing distance between themselves and their children, but this is something rather more significant, and we must recognise that it would be very painful, so we should not find it too hard to understand why they would wish for children who will be a part of their world. And yet still, I hear people say that they are just being selfish. Well, of course, they are to some extent, as is every couple that decides to have a child. Until the child exists to be the subject of selfless love, what else is there? It is once the child is born that the chapter of selfless love begins, be it deaf or hearing. However much the terms of their decision may have sounded like the language of product, most parents have an extraordinary capacity to love their child, whatever its characteristics, whatever their expectations, and it is disingenuous for us to assume otherwise. However, the criticism that seemed to be on everyone's lips was that they were inflicting deafness on a child, and if that is what they wanted to do, then it would indeed be a terrible thing, cruel and genuinely evil. But if we are to judge someone to be bad, even evil, then we have an obligation to do so responsibly. We must remember that we are talking about an act of selection. A number of embryos are created and then screened for genetic deafness. These embryos are not all versions of the same person with some small variations. Each one, if allowed to develop, would become a completely different and unique person. If we select one that would become a deaf person, let's call him John, we find that there is not another option that would become John with hearing. John simply cannot be caused to exist with hearing, and deafness is far from being a condition that he is caused to have. That is, it is not a condition that is being added to his existence, inflicted upon him, but is a condition of and for his existence. The choice then is between causing John to exist or someone else instead. Now, if we choose to cause someone else to exist instead, it would not be John's benefit. He must exist to experience any kind of benefit. Likewise, it would not be to the other potential person's detriment if we cause John to exist instead. Now we have an uncomfortable conclusion. If we are saying that we ought not to cause John to exist, then we are saying that his existence is undesirable because of his deafness. But would it be undesirable to him because of his deafness? I suspect that if you ask a deaf person if they consider their life not to be worth living because of their deafness, you might deserve the black eye you could get for it. If a deaf person's life is not undesirable to them, then we are left with their lives being undesirable to those passing this judgment. That is not to say that people do not care about and value the deaf people who do now exist, but it would be fatuous and patronizing to say that it would be preferred that they exist without deafness. They frequently cannot. This leaves the preference that they never existed in the first place. Little wonder then that so many deaf people objected to the new law by saying that it disvalues them in society. It does exactly that. And as we have seen, as nobody is being inflicted with deafness, this law does nothing to protect anyone against it. We are right to question its justice. Finally, I should note two further points. The first regards the claim that this amounts to state eugenics, made by some activists and writers opposing the change in the law. This is technically correct, although only to a very limited degree, as it currently affects only those couples that are screening embryos as part of IVF treatment. It does nothing to restrict those who may have children, nor does it affect those who conceive without such technological intervention. Further, I am not convinced that it represents the start of a slippery slope. While I agree that the law is unjust, the use of such emotive language, evoking memories of Nazi control and experiment, runs the risk of making the case against the law sound every bit as hysterical as those in the media who cried out for it. Secondly, we should note that where treatment for deafness is available, or becomes available in the future, regardless of cultural differences, parents may have an obligation to make such treatment available to their children at the soonest opportunity. However genuinely their deafness has led to a true culture and unique way of experiencing the world, that deafness is still a disability, limiting the possible scope of that experience and the possible lifestyles and careers open to them. To deny hearing to a child for the sake of belonging to the same culture may indeed be selfish, and I doubt that, faced with such a decision, any deaf parent would do so. The instinct to sacrifice for a child is usually far too strong for that.